Welcome everyone to the World Chess Championship game number 11. Today's game was absolutely wild. Let's get into it. Gukesh with the white pieces starts with knight to f3. So it's clear he wants nothing to do against Ding's French defense, playing the ready. We have d5 and pawn c4, and Ding plays pawn d4. With this move, Ding is saying we are going to have a battle on our hands. He is playing d4, which looks like a very natural move here, and it is a reversed Benoni. So if we have the starting moves, for example, d4, knight f6, c4, c5, for example, you could play the Banco, but just as an example, after for e6, knight c3 takes. We have this pawn structure where white has a space advantage with pawn on d5, and the pawn for black is on c5. In our position, we have the exact same pawn structure, but in reverse. For knight to f3, c4, d4. So an interesting approach by Ding to play with the white pieces down a tempo. His usual strategy is to play with the black pieces up a tempo using white openings. Okay, we have b4 played as Gukesh. I just want to point out that playing this position down a tempo with black is a very different type of position to be playing with the white pieces. As a general concept, in positions where there's a more symmetrical feature to it, where one side doesn't have a clear space advantage, it's a easier position to play with the white pieces where you're up a tempo, or in this case, black, for example, if he played a move like e6 and it was black's turn again and played a move like knight f6, then black would be in a position where the strategic concepts are still the same, but the dynamic possibilities are in favor of black. We have this position where the dynamic possibilities are actually favoring white. So I don't like this approach by Ding from that perspective, where you're playing down a tempo with white in a position where it's required of you, now that you have this pawn on d4, you have the space advantage, to play very combatively. And I don't think this is necessarily in his style, it's more in Gukesh's style to play concretely. Alright, with that being said, let's get into the game. Pawn c5, pawn to e3. White attempts to break down black's space advantage immediately and as fast as possible. We have knight to f6, pawn to a3, and bishop to g4. So black spends an hour for the past two moves, and it's clear that Ding has something prepared, but he's trying to remember his lines. Strategically, black has the space advantage, which means in general, he wants to be able to keep more pieces on the board. However, white has already expanded on the queen side and will continue to expand. So the space advantage afforded to black by this pawn on d4 is not really real in the sense that it's going to be used to restrict white's pieces. With that in mind, the move bishop g4 is extremely strong. The idea is that the knight is a key defender of the dark squares in the position, and black is aiming to eventually trade this bishop for the knight and try to claim a strategic edge on the dark squares. Let's see how this exactly plays out. We have takes on d4, takes on d4, pawn to h3, takes, attacking the pawn on b7, and queen to c7. We have pawn to d3, pawn to a5, and pawn to b5. And the idea of that trade was to ensure that there's no longer this knight on f3, which can put pressure on d4, pressure on e5, and with the knight coming to c5, black has a grip on the dark squares. We should also mention that at this point, Gukesh doesn't find the best way to continue here. The best move is the move pawn c5, aiming to activate the bishop to b5 or c4 before committing the pawn to the d3 square. He played the move d3, maybe with a different idea in mind. After a move like bishop f4 and e5, we have a little tactic that could be possible at some moment with bishop takes, and queen takes on b7. In this case, it doesn't work because after e5 and the bishop captures, the queen can capture with a check. Okay, what are the plans for white in this position? Now, I went ahead and went a little bit further, but what are the plans for white in this structure? In the Benoni structure, let's say from black's perspective, but here it's white up the tempo, uh, white is going to continue to expand on the queen side. White wants to play moves like b5, c5, knight d2, knight b3, target the pawn on d4, and try to get as much dynamic counterplay as possible on the queen side. From black's perspective, he has the space advantage, and his goal is to restrict white's pawn mobility on the queen side as much as possible. And for advancing the position, play moves like f5 and e4 at the right moment. So let's see how this plays out. We have pawn to a5, which is a very strong move, undermining the pawn on b4 immediately, and forcing white to play the move b5, getting a grip for black on the dark squares. This move is so important and so significant in the position that if you fail to make this move at this moment in the game, then white will be up a tempo in a Benoni with a tremendous amount of possibility to again target a lot of black's pawns, which are quite weak in the position, this d4 pawn, and stop black from ever trying to play the move e5, e4. The moves are quite natural and easy as well. We have knight d2, knight b3, bishop d2, attacking the pawn. Then we can play g3, bishop g2, attacking this pawn, and castle. And the moves and pieces are very well placed for white. So what happens if you don't play the move b5? Let's say you try to defend the position like bishop to b2, allowing this trade but keeping control over the c5 square. There we have takes, 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 and after e5, the pawn again on b4 has to move. If you play the move b5, you lose the game with queen to a5 check. And if you play the move pawn c5, then the b4 pawn could become quite weak after knight to b4. And then again, if the pawn pushes, we have queen to a5 all over again. So in the game, we have the move pawn to b5, knight to d7, pawn to g3, knight to c5, bishop to g2, knight to d7. And I really like the way black is handling this. The e5 square is under black's control, and the c5 square is under black's control. The bishop on g2 is quite strong, but with the knight standing on c5, the pawn can never be captured. We have castles, knight to e5, and while the engine really likes this move, I really hate this move for black. I think black has a very nice grip on the dark squares, and from my point of view, the move pawn to e5 makes a lot of sense to develop the bishop to d6 and to castle, get the king safe, and play consistent strategically. From the engine point of view, it is the best move in the position. It is very concrete, and it attacks the queen, and forces the queen to make some maybe unfavorable move. And I find this quite interesting in that although from a strategic perspective, it's a terrible move, it doesn't allow black to finish their development. It puts the knight on the square that the pawn wants to move to. The concrete play matters more in this position than strategy, according to the engine. However, with that being said, you now have to play extremely, extremely precisely with black for the remaining portion of the entire game. Okay, knight to e5, we have queen to f4, pinning the knight to the queen, rook to d8, defending the pawn, rook to d1, defending the pawn. The knight cannot take because of takes, and the black knight cannot capture back. And we have the move pawn g6, pawn to a4, and pawn to h5. Bishop h6 is coming, the next move, and knight d3 then becomes possible. I analyzed this position with a student of mine, and we were trying to understand and play out this position as practice to see if we can play at the World Championship level. So in this position, if you'd like, you can take a moment here, and black has a serious threat of bishop to h6, and try to solve this for white. Okay, welcome back. Gukesh found the strongest move in the position, and this is his forte, is playing very concretely. He plays the move pawn b6, undermining the queen's protection of the knight on e5. You cannot take, you have to move the queen, and the queen moves to d6, and now he follows up with bishop to a3, not allowing the bishop to have any potential skewer along this diagonal. Bishop h6 played anyways, bishop takes on c5, queen takes on c5, and queen moves to e4. We have knight to c6, just defending the pawn on b7, knight to a3, and rook to d7. We have knight to c2, and queen takes on b6. So black is up a pawn, is yet to castle, has a dark squared bishop, and has a grip on the dark squares. From white's perspective, white needs to drum up a lot of counterplay. And the only way white can really do so is against either the d4 pawn or access along the b file. Gukesh plays rook to b1, we have queen c7, and rook to b5. We have castles and knight to a1. The computer doesn't think this is the best move, but it's a very strong idea to bring the knight to b3 and then c5. And I really like this move as well. We have rook to b8, knight to b3, pawn to e6, and knight to c5. e6 is really the first concrete inaccuracy that Ding played in this game, and it's going to catch up and cause his position to have some serious problems. The best move in the position, which is not a natural move at all, is the move rook d6. Just getting out of the attack of this knight c5 with tempo, hitting the pawn on b7. You also have the potential to maybe move the rook to e6 and force the queen away. Not so obvious why rook d6 is the best move anyways. We have pawn to e6, knight to c5, rook to e7, and rook to b1. Ding is down to 7 minutes, 41 seconds. Gukesh has 13 minutes. It is a battle. This game can go either way. If Ding can maintain his pawn advantage, he will be on the better side of the endgames. Okay, but it's black to move. Your pawn on b7 is hit by the two rooks and the knight on c5. And Ding plays a one-move blunder and effectively gives Gukesh the opportunity to find a tactic to win the game. Ding plays the move queen c8. You had to play a move like knight to b4, just trying to shut out the rooks from the b file. Okay, queen c8 is played. If you want, you can try to find the tactic here as white. You have 13 minutes. Basically, if you find this move, you have a winning position, and you can take down the reigning world champion. Pause the video if you'd like, and try to find the best move. Okay, welcome back. Gukesh, of course, found the move, and I'm sure you did as well. It is queen takes on c6. You cannot take with the queen, because we simply take the queen. And if you take with the pawn, then after rook takes, the queen is lost. Queen can take, or the rook can defend. Either way, white is the one who comes up material. So after queen takes e6, Ding resigned the game, and Gukesh is victorious. Okay, there are 3 rounds to go, and it's looking very good for Gukesh. Will he be able to hold the next 3 games? He doesn't need to play for a win anymore. If given the opportunity to go for a draw or repeat moves and try to play for a win, he should definitely play the repetition and go for a draw. Or will Ding in the coming games be able to put up a enough pressure against Gukesh's defenses as black. Ding hasn't really put up a lot of too much pressure where Gukesh had the black pieces, so he's gonna have to come up with something if he wants to keep his title and remain the world champion. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.